Hi, welcome everybody. That's Barb Wallace. I'm here today. Donna is still on grandparent leave. I got the note today that little CJ was 4 weeks old today, so she'll be back next week, I think. And unfortunately, her replacement Renee is out sick. So it's me, but I'm here with Kimberly Sullivan, who is I'm very excited to have. She's calling us from Italy, so hello.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'll give you the official bio, which is that Kimberly grew up in the suburbs of Boston and Saratoga Springs, New York. We were just talking about gambling. Although she now lives in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City home when she's in the U.S. She majored in the poli-sci in history at Cornell University and earned her MBA with a concentration in strategy and marketing from Bocconi University Business School in Milan. Did I pronounce it right?
Perfect.
Afflicted with a severe case of wanderlust, she worked in journalism and government for the U.S., the Czech Republic, and Austria before settling down in Rome, where she works as international development and writes fiction. She's a member of the WFAWA and the Historical Novel Society, and she's the author of 4 novels, 3 Coins, Dark Blue Waves, In the Shadow of the Apennines, and Rome's Last Noble Palace, which I loved. And you have a short story collection called Drink Wine and Be Beautiful, and your 5th book is coming out later this year. It's called Easter at 3 Coins Inn. Do you have a release date?
It's going to be, I haven't set the date, but it's going to be late November or early December.
Okay. All right. So tell us a little bit about your writing journey. Like, how did you start to where you ended up today?
Well, I think I kind of went full circle because when I was little, I really wanted to be an author. That was what I wanted to do. And then, when I speak to many authors, life takes you in different directions. I did work for quite a bit as a journalist, so I was always writing. I'm also writing for my work in international development, but it's a very different type of writing, and I miss that creative writing. So I started off in short stories to get back into it, and started publishing short stories in anthologies and sending them out to magazines. There are a lot of great online magazines today and everything. And that was fun. And then decided I wanted to write a novel. And I have not looked back since then. I really started learning also about self-publishing because I am a self-published indie author. I didn't actually look for to look traditionally that long, because as I was getting interested with it, indie publishing was growing. And so I was really following along on that. And because I tend to write quite quickly, I can keep things going at the pace that I'd like to be able to keep them going. So it's really been exciting, being able to be on this author journey right now.
So now, I'm curious, do you think being a journalist changed your writing style? I mean, obviously it helped you write fast, I'm going to guess.
Yes.
Because you have to learn to write to a deadline. You have to write to a deadline. But did it help you? Did it change your style at all? Like, I'm thinking, just going back to my own communications background, you learn to don't mince words. It's a much tighter, much cleaner, very Hemingway-esque almost kind of style. So did you find that it changed you like that, or did you able to keep your creative flourishes?
It's a really good question, because it should, you're right, in the Hemingway-esque stream, it really should make you hone down, which I am able to do if I have to write something, especially because I was working a lot with radio and television journalism, and you have to write quickly, you have to get on the air, you have to do things very quickly. However, yes, the style in journalism is quite different from novels. And I think that I am far more verbose in novels than I will be if I have to write to if I know what my word count is, if I know how long it is. So I think that it gives me that freedom to write perhaps more creatively the way I wanted to, backstory, things that I'd like to do. So while it would be good, and in fact, I'm trying to play a little bit with flash fiction a little bit to get back into that. I'm not good at it, but I do like to try it because I think it's good to mix things up. That's why I like to go between short stories too and novels, because you get back into that writing creatively, but really looking at all of the words. But I think my natural state that I like to do when I'm very creative is just writing quickly. Yes, absolutely. But I don't think that I'm as sparse as I could be, let's say. I like digging in a little bit more and writing in a different style. But I think it does help. No matter what you're doing with writing, I think that you can bring that to your creative writing.
Okay, sorry, that was a brief appearance to let me know my cat that had escaped is back.
Well, that's good to know.
So if anyone cares, the cat's back. See, the reason I asked is because I find that after years of writing business communication, I became very sparse. almost to a point where it's a detriment. And, my beta readers will be like, you're a little too thin, a little more. So I'm curious about that. Now, as far as indie, what do you think was your biggest challenge going into indie? Because it is such a crowded market now.
It is such a crowded market, and there's so much to learn at the beginning. I mean, I think that for indie authors, I am actually someone who just really believes in it, and I was lucky enough to meet a lot of people who are good spokespeople for it. I remember I used to go down to a great conference in southern Italy, which sadly they don't have anymore, but it was in a beautiful place in Matera for women's fiction. And I met David Goff from there, who's Irish. He's very good. He's got a great newsletter. In general, even if you're not an indie author, I tell everyone to sign on to that because he just goes through so much. And he was just so passionate about it. And I remember that I spoke with him a few times, and while I was down there, and I just got excited about it too. It just also works with, I've got a stressful job, which I love, but it has a lot of layers, a lot of things that you have to do. And I thought, oh, I don't want to actually replicate my day work with my moonlighting. And so this way, I love that you have complete control over it. I work with external editor whom I've worked with all of my novels and really love. I work with a proofreader. I have beta readers. I go through all of those steps, but I love that I have the ultimate control of what I want to do. And that means a lot to me, especially, as I said, if you're doing something as a moonlighting job, you want to be able to have that full flexibility. However, in the beginning, yes, you have everything to learn. I mean, you have to learn how it is done. You have to set up your workflow so that you're getting it to your editor, you're getting it to your proofreader, you're getting it to your cover designers to be able to do it. So that takes a while to build up. Then you have to learn about the platforms and how it works and how you can check your marketing. So there is absolutely a lot to learn, but I have to say my impression is a lot of people, even traditionally published, are doing a lot of that themselves anyway. I mean, I think that today it's not quite that, with a few exceptions, with a few lucky exceptions, of course. But unless you're, I don't know, a J.K. Rowling or a Stephen King, that maybe they don't actually have to do anything after they write it. I think most authors have to do a lot of that on their own anyway. So no matter what, I don't have any plans to go to traditional publishing, but I know people who to help them. So I think it's always a good skill to learn.
Now, do you do the advertising and everything else? And because that was one of my questions is if you have a day job. So now you have a day job and pretty much the advertising, everything the marketing is another job.
Yeah.
And then you have to balance that with your writing. So how do you manage to get all three?
Well, I think that I could always be doing better with, of course, you can always spend more time marketing your books. I do a lot of things that I work with book bloggers. I work with, I always get my publications up on NetGalley. I have them up for a period of time. I get a lot of reviews in the beginning. That obviously helps. Then I have pushes. I do price, sales and things like that absolutely help a lot. As people who write know, getting things up on BookBub. I always get my new book up on BookBub, which of course is wonderful. And then I've gotten them up a few other times for things that always gives you a big sales boost. So yeah, and then just a lot of, the lovely thing is that we're getting to go to podcasts, speak about your book. I live in Italy, so every once in a while I go to events here, which is so wonderful. So yeah, a lot of it's a lot of work, absolutely. But as you know very well as a fellow author, when you love writing, you love talking about writing, it makes it a lot of fun.
Well, and I'm going to say the genre might be a little better because romance, the model for indie romance is fast, getting them out. I think the beauty of self-publishing and historical is you are allowed a little leisure. They know that it's a bigger book. Your readers are willing to wait the year and know that you're going to do one a year and not, every 3 months or 4 months or whatever.
That's a killer. I must say that when I started off, I had a lot of romance writers as beta readers, and I'm so impressed with romance writers because actually I write pretty quickly. I pretty much have been publishing 2 a year, but I know for romance writers, that's nothing. So I'm always amazed with the speed with which, because their fans really want them to have one book after another. But you're absolutely right. You don't have to have that kind of pace. It does give you a little bit more time. But because I write between contemporary and historical, the historical we were speaking about, also recently, because I've been doing a lot of research too for my next historical. It takes so much time, and you really do get bogged down, for good or for bad. I mean, a lot of
That's
things
the
are
best part.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, it just takes you on all these different directions, and you start thinking about, oh, that's so interesting. I'd like to do that maybe for another project. So when I write contemporary, it just is much faster, obviously. So switching between historical and contemporary also makes it a little bit easier to have more output, let's say.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I was going to, back when I wrote contemporary, I could write much faster. It is the research that slows you down because you
Yeah.
have to be so accurate. It must help that you are actually in the location that you're writing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, because that makes a big difference. That, I know that, that it's just interesting because I write a lot, as you know, in based in Italy. And
Yep.
so they're usually time periods or issues that are really interesting to me. So I wrote one, which was a little bit more. It was also a dual timeline, and perhaps a third of it was historical, but it was in a region that I love, Abruzzo, and it was a site of a really a massive earthquake. And of course, I could go to the town all the time. I could do the research. I could speak to people, not who were obviously, because it took place around the First World War, but I could hear stories from people whose, grandparents had told them about this. And it was really, that made a big difference. I mean, being able to do that, I think it would have been a hard book to be able to write if I hadn't been in Italy and able to do that.
Yeah. No, I'm jealous that you're there. As someone who's writing something based in Rome and can't go to Rome at the moment, I am jealous of that.
Hopefully soon, though.
So I do want to talk about Rome's Last Noble Palace because it was a fun book to read. But before I do that, you're part of an anthology that's coming out in 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
And I
We're so
wanted to give that a
excited.
shout out because we have a lot of mutual friends who are in this book. It comes out June 8th and it's called Feisty Deeds, right?
Exactly. And for those who don't know, that's Women's Fiction Day. So we're super excited to be able to launch that on June 8th. So it's Feisty Deeds, historical fictions of daring women. And this has been such a fun project. We have 23 stories in this collection. We've been working on it. It's kind of embarrassing to say, but for a year and a half. So we didn't actually know how to do an anthology. I mean, we love the idea, and we put this forward at a Women's Fiction Writers Association historical fiction meeting, and we're super excited about it. But of course, there's so many, I mean, kind of what we were talking about with learning how to indie publish. I mean, learning how to edit an anthology was also a big task.
What was the challenge? Is it trying to just
It's
make
just
everything
everything.
flow
It's
in
just,
the right order?
yeah, it was deciding a theme. It was deciding how long it was going to be. A lot is just reaching out to the authors, going back and forth. We had a lot of editing to do. So we wound up doing a lot of developmental editing. The stories are great, but, I contribute to a lot of anthologies. I've worked with them, but a lot of our writers were not short story writers, right? So they were more novel writers, as are we all. I mean, I'm primarily novel as well, but short story has a different, it's only 3,000 words too, which I should mention, which is 10, 11 pages. So some of the things were, people were just putting in too many characters, too many plot points. So we were really committed to working with everyone to go back and do revisions, and that took a lot of time, developmental editing, and then we did the editing, and then we're getting everything out. We worked with professional graphic designers. The cover is lovely.
I know.
And then learning the new platform for getting it out, joint marketing, putting things together, helping people with social media and how they'll do it. But it's fascinating. It really does go from the 15th century to the 20th century. We have these great stories that really across continents, women and young girls in very different situations, because however you wanted to interpret feisty. And I think it's fascinating. I mean, I've read these stories myself so many times, but even after having read it so many times, it's every time I pick it up, it's something else that I pick up or I get from that. So I'm highly recommending that people get this when it's going to be coming out on the 8th. And the other reason to do that is that all of the proceeds, we won't be earning anything from this. It's all going to go to the Women's Fiction Writers Association Scholarship Fund. And this helps Largely young writers, but writers in general who have financial hardships and are working towards their goal of being a writer, but need some assistance to be able to go to conferences, to be able to have attend craft classes. Sometimes they need some kind of software technology, and so we're really excited that the money is going to go to a really good cause.
Well, I downloaded it from NetGalley yesterday because it's not available for pre-order. I looked
No,
and I was like,
because we're figuring out all of the software for that too. That is my task. And so, but it will be, it will be,
okay.
it will be
All
ready.
right. Well, we'll make sure we share the link because it
Fantastic.
is an exciting thing. And I know some of the writers in there's some really strong voices. So
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to reading it. I downloaded it earlier this week and it's actually the next one in the queue now that I finished reading the one I finished last night.
Oh,
So
great to
I will be
hear. Yeah,
giving a
no, so
review.
many, all of the stories are beautiful and they really, everyone brings a different, something different to the conversation about feisty women, feisty deeds.
So speaking of feisty women, though, we'll go to Rome's last noble palace because I thought that this was what I liked about this book. We should say this book it's a dual timeline. It's
Mhm.
set in 1896 and like around 2021, whenever the present day is. And it's about a woman two women. One is a woman American who's come to live with her aunt, who is a principessa, if I remember right, or
Yes, she married into the Brancaccio family, the noble family. So she
and
became
that's
a
a real
princess.
family, right?
That is real. Yes, that was based on a
So
real woman, a
was the
real.
villa a real place?
It is, and it happens to be right next to where I live. So I actually, very much like the Martin in my novel, I looked out at the Palazzo Brancaccio, which of course is why I wanted to write about
Yeah, no, it sounds lovely. Okay, now I'm more jealous about Rome. But
it.
and then there's also an American who comes over and is pretty much living in your apartment building or goes to live in the same place, right? She takes an apartment there. And both these women are struggling. What I liked about it was they're still struggling for agency, and it showed that like you understood in 1896 why this woman didn't have a voice, and she was going to have to marry who who was chosen for, and things like that. I loved that it showed that even in 2020, people still didn't have the agency. And it was very much a feminist book, wouldn't you say?
I think there are definite themes for that, absolutely. But I like these stories of women with struggles across centuries. I do think so much has changed, but I think that lots of things still remain the same in certain ways, or certain struggles that women have. And I like this idea that we can learn something from women who came before us and people who came before us. And even in a city like Rome, I mean, that's always the case with such a long history.
Yeah, well, that's what I liked about it. Is Isabella in 1896 is very feisty, but
Mhm.
it was a you saw like how little certain things had changed when you get to Sophie, where she's still struggling to speak up with the coworker who's
Hmm.
over talking her in meetings and taking credit for things, and that was so relevant because we've all had that as a woman
Sure.
professional. Um, and so you said what inspired by my question is what inspired the story, but it's basically because you were looking at that building, or
It is. I mean, the palazzo is really very beautiful, and it actually was the last Roman, last noble palace because obviously things were changing. It was built in 1896 by a famous architect in Rome, and so the mention of the architect and the mention of the painter, these were real people. The noble family is real. Obviously, Isabel, the who comes to live there, she's fictional. And I was fascinated by it because it was for many years a museum. So, this museum in which my modern protagonist works, Sophie, did exist at that museum. My timeline changes because it's in 2018. It stopped being a museum, sadly, in 2016. But it was
oh,
a wonderful collection of Oriental art, is how it's translated. But it was basically from Asia and from the Near East. So my protagonist Sophie goes there to work in Persian art because she's a Persian art specialist, very young, first serious job, and she has a bit of imposter syndrome when we meet her in the first years. Then we meet her later on and see that, of course, she's grown into her profession. But I loved going to that museum. I used to go there quite often and walk around its room and was fascinated by, yeah, these beautiful frescoes, these beautiful ballrooms and everything. And it was, yeah, fascinating because it was built with the money by this American woman, daughter of an industrialist who, I mean, the idea of, I think that we know this idea of dollar brides more in the UK, a little bit more in France, but the same thing existed in Italy. They would be married off to the nobility. So she married this Neapolitan noble family, very, very long bloodlines, but as many nobility at the time, not as say as much financial backing. So her money coming into it actually allowed her to build this palazzo. In the story, there's also chapters that come from San Gregorio da Sassola, which is a little town outside of Rome. And she bought a castle. She bought a medieval castle and fixed up the castle in this town. You can go there today. It's fascinating. I mean, this American woman came over, built this noble palace, then bought a medieval castle and, you know, became kind of a patron to this town. So the story was fascinating. I was really interested in having her as a character, and then having her have a niece who, of course, her mother was hoping that she could marry well, so sent her over to the Rome of this time.
Well, because, you know, you don't think about it, but there was very much the Gilded Age everywhere then, not just,
absolutely.
We think about it as only in the UK and the US, but Italy had to have its own too. I mean,
yeah, but even more so here, because as I mentioned a little bit in this, that I love that time. I mean, in general, I love this fin de siècle, you know, this period in Europe as well. But in Italy, what people forget because of Italy's long history is, and, you know, this was fun for me to have Isabel discussing this, Rome really was changing a lot at the time, because of course Rome's history is very ancient, as we all know, but Rome as the capital of Italy had only been in that position since 1870, because the country was unified in 1861 and Rome itself was still part of the Papal States. So it only became part of, let's say, a unified Italy, you know, 26 years before this takes place. So everything was changing in Rome. I mean, and people were flooding here. It had been a very small town under the Papal States. It was still quite small then, but people were coming all the time. There was more literature, there was more art, there was, you know, much more excitement. So she comes at this time when Rome is really changing a lot. So yes, it's still the Gilded Age, but also you're coming from a sheer papal state where it would have been very different, to you know, this luxury, all of these people moving here, people living in Rome.
That's true, and that's when the ghetto broke up. So then those who don't know, there was a Jewish ghetto up until like the late 1800s, and that finally broke up, and it brought this whole new culture and this explosion of different people into the city as well. And that lasted up through the First World War. And into the late 30s, and then or the 1920s, we all know that sort of went back again. But and so Italy still was like a constant change. It was in a real change of flux, because it had two civil wars. Like it had the first one and then the second one, and it was so. And what I loved is it was kind of like being on a tour of Rome, because you know, Sophie is taking tours with her son and taking people places, and you know, the first time she's going as a newcomer, the second time she's seeing new things. So it was like taking a little in-depth walking tour of Rome at the same time. And then there's a light paranormal theme to it. We should tell people.
Yeah, which is my first ghostly element, let's say, in a novel. But I needed to include that because the reason that I actually had this idea for the book was looking out at the Palazzo Brancaccio when it was still a museum, and there was an attic room, and I saw at night, it seemed like a candlelight and a hand reaching and with the curtains, basically closing the curtains. And I thought, oh, that's so strange. Is someone living up there? Is that and so it just started me thinking about that. So I have to include a ghostly element.
Well, and we should say there's also a very tragic subplot, because you talk a lot about, I mean, going back to the whole women's issue, you talk about the fate of a lot of women because of how easily they're discarded and what they suffer from men just kind of using them. And so there's a whole subplot to that does end up tying in to the tragedy and to the ghost and everything else. So it's a great book. I recommend people read it because it was a lot of fun. So, okay. So we're wrapping up. We ask our guests two questions always. First is, what are you working on?
So right now I'm sorry, I thought you were asking both and I had to remember them both, but this is much better. I am now finalizing, I just got the edits back on my next novel, which is going to be part of a series on Three Coins, which
I'm
is
guessing is near the fountain.
Three Coins. The original was absolutely, it was the three women who are brought together, three kind of unlikely friends who become fast friends, and that takes place in Rome. But then I have them moving up to Umbria. I don't know if you've been to a beautiful little town called Todi, where one of the women opens an inn, a kind of agriturism, a kind of farm holiday inn, and the other becomes a chef there. And so it's kind of nice because I'm going to be continuing with this with different guests that come, to the hotel. So I've had a lot of fun with that, and now that's going out to my proofreader to be out in the fall. And the other one, as you know, I'm working on my historical research for. It's going to be a triple timeline novel around sports, around track and field. And one of them, of course, that I've gotten bogged down in the research was really looking through all the old fascist newspapers at the time to see about that period, which is just fascinating, and modern era. And then I have to do, I know, because we were talking about it, and it's just absolutely a completely different city, and looking through it, and I have spent hours and hours looking through all of the old newspapers, but it's been such a pleasure.
So, and then what are you reading right now?
What am I reading? Well, actually, I am reading for the umpteenth time, the Feisty Deeds. So another plug for the book. But I usually, when I come back to the States, I do read electronically, but I read a lot of books, physical books. And I just came back from the US, so I just packed all of these books. I have a huge pile of lots of historical fictions that I have to read. I have a couple. I just read Jill Paul. I really like her a lot with historical fiction, and she's going to be speaking at the Historical Novel Society where I'm going to be going. And she's got a lot of good ones. And I just had finished her fantastic book about Elizabeth Arden and Helena Rubinstein and kind of the battle for supremacy in the beginning of the 20th century in the beauty industry, which was fascinating. And
I read her King Tut one, and that one was fascinating too. She's good. I'm looking forward to that. So, well, I'm really glad you came here. We should have said you were in the States because your son graduated college. So congratulations.
Absolutely.
Having another productive member of society.
Absolutely. Well, it meant a lot to come back, to be able to go back and see it. So that was wonderful.
Yeah. Congratulations. And congratulations to him. And good luck job hunting to him. And we appreciate it. Next month, we're going to be doing Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. And then our featured author, to let everyone know, is Janice Robinson Daly. We're going to continue our indie thing. She's going to be talking about I want to say it's her Unbeaten Path is the name of her book. And I will promise I'll put it in the loop because I've done this 1,000 times and I messed up her name every time. But it's about the early female physicians coming out of Pennsylvania. And she's writing a sequel to it. And she's going to be on the 18th. We were going to have it on earlier, but she made us right around Tom Brady's induction into the Patriot Hall of Fame. So, so again, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We'll put buy links for everything. Everyone go buy Rome's Last Noble Palace and Feisty Deeds because it's good for a good cause. And we really appreciate it. So thank you very much for coming and working out the schedule for the International Times.
Thank you, Barbara.
And